Welcome, everyone, to Year 3 of Rupp Falsgraff's Empire State Entrepreneurs and New York Business Law podcast, a really fun and informative forum for us to showcase our clients, strategic partners, good friends, and community leaders to talk about relevant issues for entrepreneurs and business owners throughout New York. My name is David Falsgraff. I'm very blessed to be the managing partner at a local law firm called Rupp Falsgraff. We've been in business now going on 26 years and have become a full-service firm with offices throughout New York. It's a really fun work environment to be in, and I'm really blessed to have had a role in helping to build the firm over the years. Before we get to our special guest, I did want to take a minute to thank Eric and Mike and all of our friends at Incept for allowing us to host our podcast here in this super cool studio. It's come a long way over the 3 years since I've been using it, and when I tell you it's state-of-the-art, it really is. Incept does such a good job for my law firm, and really, really excited about all the great initiatives that we're working on with them. So with that, I'm going to welcome a good friend of mine, Jack O'Donnell. Jack is the founder and managing partner at O'Donnell & Associates, a really great lobby firm that's headquartered right here in Buffalo, which obviously maintains a presence in Albany, and we'll talk a lot about that. But before we do, I just want to welcome you to the show, Jack.
Well, David, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and really looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thank you for taking time out of your day, Jack, and I'm glad we're doing this with you physically present in Buffalo, not over a Teams or a Zoom, with you being in Albany, because I know you spend quite a bit of time there as well. And we'll talk a little bit about how you do spend your time today. But before doing so, can you give our listeners a little sense of your background? I know you come from a proud Western New York family, and but give us all a little insight into your upbringing and sort of your early years before you got to college.
What a good question. Well, grew up in Buffalo in Western New York, kind of grew up sort of in and around this political and governmental world. As you know, my father recently retired as a New York State Supreme Court judge, so I grew up kind of watching him. Well, he was a little tough on sons, I always thought, but I grew up as he was aspiring for that and being part of that. So grew up in Buffalo and Western New York. Went to Buffalo Public Schools through 8th grade. Grew up right in the city, and just a proud Buffalonian.
And I know your mom was also an active attorney and had some prominent roles throughout her career as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, really, really blessed here. My father ended his career as a New York State Supreme Court justice. My mother was she went to law school a little later in life at a time when there weren't so many women in this world. Worked as an assistant U.S. attorney for a number of years, really worked her way kind of through the office there, and ended up becoming the U.S. attorney for the Western District, the first woman there.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing. She went on to work at the state level, work in Washington under the Obama administration. Really big footsteps that I'm honored to follow in.
That's really amazing, and know both your parents well, and they're just wonderful people. So no surprise, Jack, where and how you've ended up as successful as you've been. But I'm sure with that, with the success that you saw your parents have and their engagement in the community, both professionally, civically, personally, that comes with a responsibility, I'm sure. And so talk to me and our listeners a little bit about you. I want to say you went to Canisius High School.
Close. I went to a better high school. I went to St. Joe's. Right. St. Joe's.
Duly noted, and thank you for correcting me on that. So, we'll let that one stay in, Eric, too. So I think that's a good zinger that Jack just. All right, that's great. We got good point, Jack, and thank you for correcting the record there. So you go off to Joe's, and then from there, remind me where you attend college.
Yeah, went to St. Joe's. I graduated from Canisius College. Spent a little time at Fairfield University, where I had an awful lot of fun and did not learn very much, and was happy to graduate from Canisius, where I did learn a lot.
And talk to us a little bit about then the early stages of your career.
Yeah, well, again, back to this, I watched a lot of politics growing up. I would go to campaign rallies or door-to-door or meet candidates, and it kind of got under my skin. So I graduated Canisius in 1996, which happened to be a presidential election year. I had spent most of college working at the U.S. At Immigration Services, who had a big office here in Buffalo, and they had actually offered me a full-time job, and so I planned to take that job and be an inspector, right? So what's your citizenship?
100%.
hang out at the Peace Bridge, and it seemed like a lot of fun, but the reality is I wasn't going to become full-time until later in November, even though I graduated in May. So I hitched a ride with some of my parents' friends, got a ride to the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, passed out resumes on paper.
Incredible.
I don't know that still exists, but passed them out to people, snuck into the convention floor. I got to meet a lot of people, and eventually got a job working on the Clinton-Gore reelection campaign in New York City. My boss was this political operative named Bill de Blasio, who's gone on to do a couple other things. His deputy, who I reported to, was a woman named Karen Persicelli, who is now Karen Hinton Keo, who happens to be the secretary to the governor of New York right now. So got to meet a lot of people, got involved in the politics of it, and the idea of going back to a booth and checking people's passports just didn't appeal. So I was off and running. Yeah,
I don't blame you. So that late 1990s, you begin to think that being in and around politics was something that was of interest to you. You got some firsthand experience with it working on the campaign in 96. So walk us through then sort of as you get through the 90s and into the early 2000s, how what progression your career takes.
Yeah, well, to be honest, at the time I was a young man and was having fun and doing stuff that I thought mattered and wasn't thinking as much about a career or the next day, right, or the next year. But I fell in with this guy who was running for United States Senate. Nobody really gave him a chance. He was a distant third in Democratic primary polls, and nobody thought that any of the Democrats could beat Al D'Amato, who was the incumbent senator. It's hard to believe that the late 90s, New York was a purple state, but it was, and we had a Republican governor, and all of these things were at issue. But because no one thought he could win, he was willing to hire some, kids without a lot of experience. So I spent the next 18 months driving around New York State with a big sign that said, "Come meet Congressman Chuck Schumer."
Incredible.
Incredible. Chuck convinced me, right? He came to Buffalo. He was talking about the future of Buffalo in 1997 in a way that very few people in Buffalo were. He was very bullish and optimistic about the future of this community, which is really what I felt. And he went on to win, and the truth is all my friends, my parents' friends said, well, you've got to go to Washington. There's a great opportunity to work for a senator. And Washington's very exciting. But, to your point, I love upstate New York. I love Buffalo and Western New York. And I felt like, especially at that time, so many people who were really talented were leaving, right? Everybody I went to college and high school with, half of them had jobs in North Carolina or out west. And, I felt a real obligation to stay here and try to be part of the solution, especially working with someone who said he was going to come back, and he has.
How telling is that, Jack? And I think I didn't know that about you, that you had this opportunity to go off to D.C. and I mean, what a mature decision at the time to know the importance of this community to you and to your family. And I can't think of many, including myself, that would have passed up an opportunity to go serve an important role in D.C. with, a rising Senate star like Chuck Schumer. So that speaks volumes to me about your mindset, even as a younger adult, about the importance of this community. And look no further than that decision to see, people that were not leaving, but that there were a handful of individuals like yourself who were staying and going to, drive change or make an impact. So you ever look back on that decision and wonder what the sliding door scenario, if you had gone with Senator Schumer, and how long you might have stayed in D.C., or what career path might have looked like for you?
A little. I mean, I have some friends who made the different choice, right, and ended up in D.C. And, look, they've had the opportunity to work in the White House, work in congressional leadership, and all of that's really interesting. But Chuck Schumer really was approaching how a state office worked differently, right? At that point, one United States senator from New York had visited all 62 counties in a 6-year term, right? Pat Moynihan had done that over 6 years. And, Chuck developed it differently. And that understanding of how things work and how you can make change and how you can cut through red tape and deliver results, is just really important to who I am and what I do today. So, yeah, once in a while I wonder, but again, this is my home and I love it here.
That's great. So you pass on the opportunity to go to D.C., thank God for us. And then what happens in the early 2000s? Or are you working on your own yet? Or are you still sort of working with other political leaders?
I spent another, 10 years in politics and government, working for a few different electeds, Elliot Spitzer, Ellen Hevesy, Hillary Clinton, Kathy Hochul as county clerk, Andrew Cuomo, basically all the statewide Democrats you heard of. I've been their upstate Sherpa, if you will.
Awesome.
How do you pronounce Cheektowaga, right? And that's been a part of it. But being able to connect upstate and downstate and be able to speak both languages, I think is important to who I am.
When did you develop this idea or thought that maybe like formalizing that role you were playing for these sort of statewide political leaders and thinking about sort of changing your focus to, rather than advocating for them, but advocating for, constituency groups or businesses in throughout the state, but maybe in particular in upstate or Western New York? Was that DNA always present in you, Jack, or was there an aha moment when you thought, hey, look, maybe I could use my experience, my contacts, my desire to see Western New York succeed in a different way. I could use my talents to become sort of an advocate for those businesses. Was there a moment in time when that happened?
Yeah, I'd like to tell you about the time I had the eureka, the flux capacitor moment. But the reality is I kind of lucked into this too, or stumbled or fell, I guess. I didn't grow up thinking, I want to be a lobbyist. When I was working in government and politics, a couple of times I got a little bored, went back to law school. I had some real health challenges at one point in my life. I almost died. I had an organ transplant that saved my life, which is actually where I got involved with units, upstate New York transplant, where I got to know and admire your mother very, very much so. Became a great friend and was a great advocate.
She loved you, that's for sure.
I loved her, man. She did so much for me as I was coming through this, things I can't ever explain. But, so I had some friends who had been on the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2000, and they were at a lobbying firm in Albany. I was just finishing up law school and working on some campaigns at the time, and they said, come do a little of this. It's fun. And I had the same reaction a lot of people do, which is a lobbyist? Come on, right? I mean, is it worse than a trial lawyer, right? I got all of these in my DNA, David. It was sort of like, well, I don't know that that's really what I want to do. How am I going to tell my mother that, right? But then, I worked out a couple things and got to see this side of it. And to be honest, I realized in a lot of ways it's the fun part of government. Right? At the end of the day, I don't, with all due respect to the people who do care, I don't care if your sidewalk is broken or the tree came down. I don't really want to go door to door and get petitions. Those things are vitally important, but they don't speak to me. Making a big project happen, getting this building open, getting an airport, an airline in, trains working, things built. That's really cool and that's really fun. And I realized I can do that and not have to do the other part of it and work with a lot of different really interesting things. And so that's how I got here.
Remind me when you went to law school, what years?
Well, I'm one of those people who spent 7 years in law school. No, I started in 2004. I went for a couple years. I got sick. I had to, petition the court to go back to law school, and graduated in 2010.
Incredible. And so shortly thereafter, it was in the sort of 2010 to 2020 era that your career shifted away from straight politics or political support to more of a lobbyist role or position.
Yeah, that's about right. I think the first time I ever registered as a lobbyist was in 2008. And then, I was still finishing law school and doing a couple things. But yeah.
Tell me then, as we get closer to present time or, late, 2010s, going into maybe just pre-COVID, tell our listeners a little bit about sort of initial impressions. Were you finding that those goals, those dreams of yours to effectuate change or to help, private business enterprises or even the public sector in your community see success? Did it happen? Did you strike lightning? I mean, did you see outcomes and results initially from your lobbying efforts?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, look, it is slow. It can be hard. It can be, even I think I've said this to you recently. We can get government moving faster, but that's not the same as moving fast, right? But look,
well said.
I got to work at a growing lobbying firm where I learned a lot about this side of it and got to work on some really interesting things. I'll tell you the most. I mean, one of them that stands out is, we did work for a company called Alstom, who is a large train manufacturer around the world. They have a huge facility in Hornell, New York. And I think we started working with them in 2009. They were going after a big contract from Amtrak to build the new Acela trains. They were competing against other global companies. And one of the things that I was able to do that I think particularly, I don't know who else could have done it, but because of my relationship at the time with Governor Andrew Cuomo, we were able to get some state investment in the factory, right? The factory at one point it had 1,000 people. It was down to about 100. We were able to get some state investment, which allowed them to bid a little less. At the same time, because of my relationship with Chuck Schumer, we got Chuck Schumer to work Amtrak. Now, it's an open secret in politics and government that Andrew Cuomo and Chuck Schumer hated each other. But I was able to keep them apart. Yeah, and get this done. And they won a $2+ almost $3 billion contract. And those trains are now going between Boston and New York City.
What a great example, Jack. I think of my profession, the legal profession, our profession is, the importance of advocacy, and whether you're a trial lawyer or an M&A lawyer or a labor and employment lawyer, but pure and simple, I think the attorneys in our profession who see the most success are those who are very strong advocates and able to, work a room or to broker deals that others, if you took a litigious approach, it might not work. And if you gave everything, then, you might not be as effective. But I mean, that example you just outlined, I think is really a good one when it comes to sort of navigating competing interests, navigating very, different federal and state issues. And, so I'm impressed that even in an early stage of your lobbying career to be involved in a project of that magnitude and to see that sort of success is pretty cool.
It was great. And look, that's how I see our job, my job, right, is as an advocate. It's no different than the people who are out there advocating for the environment or advocating for, the park down the street, right? We do that on a larger level, and it can be more involved and more complicated. But it's all advocacy and relationships.
Both critically important, I think, to getting clients to have success that we're seeking for them. So COVID hits. Post-COVID, you're still sort of working with the more established firm.
So I made the decision to leave. I left in November. So 4 months before COVID.
Oh, God bless you. Oh my gosh.
Hit. And I talking about entrepreneurship and all the things that you guys do so well. I'll be very honest. I didn't know how to do this, right? And I had wanted to leave for a while. Again, being at the big firm was great. I saw a lot. I learned a lot. But I also learned a lot about what I didn't want to do, right? Starting with conflicts. There is no bar association providing guidance to lobbying firms, and it gets messy. And it's not just we're on opposite sides of a bill. It's if I go see the speaker, what's my number one priority? Well, that gets lost if there's 12 other partners with different priorities coming in behind me. So
that's a good point.
I wanted to leave, but I was very scared. I remain scared about running a business, right? I didn't want to be doing the IT, right? I didn't want to be worrying about people's email addresses and all of the things that go into take a time of a managing partner, right? And I like to tell people I know a lot more about the cause and effects of the War of 1812 than I do about writing a business plan. So, it was a real leap of faith. And then, 3 months in, as my clients were still transitioning, basically all my clients came with me, but it takes time to get them registered and cleaned up and moved and all of those things. Suddenly some of them were laying off 10,000 people and how to feed my family. And now I felt like I've got to deliver the payroll for my team and get that done. So, oh gosh, I know it was scary and terrible for so many people and worse on the people who didn't make it through, but it was scary.
Tell me, so you survived through COVID and begin to get some traction as we're thinking about 2023 and 2024 and even last year. So give our listeners a sense of how you're spending your time today and what sort of engagements have you excited, whether it's statewide or here in Buffalo or Western New York. What are you motivated about today, Jack?
Yeah, well, first, just to finish that thought, I'll be honest, you could see during COVID that people needed help, right? And people who had relationships were able to communicate with elected officials, with their staffs, and we could do that. And that's kind of what set us up for today, right? The chaos that is out there at the federal level, at some extent to the state and local level, may not be the way that the founders intended. But the more people need help and the less they think, oh, I'm just going to see my congressman at Wegmans and it'll get done, the better that is for us, from a 100%. Business point of view. So look, I'm really fortunate. Our firm has grown like you were across the state, Buffalo, Rochester, Albany, New York City. We are really kind of doubling down on our New York City presence. There's obviously a new mayor there, like there is in other parts of the state. But there's also a new city council, new speaker, just a number of factors while we're doing things. I mean, again, I am so fortunate because we get to help all these people who help people, right? And so, we have some clients in healthcare who are being really challenged, but finding innovative ways to get them funded and solve their problems and move them forward. We talked for a minute about Ulstom. Last year, we were able to help them get a big contract at the MTA. So now when they're done with the Amtrak plans, they've got a $3 billion subway plan. For me, it's those challenges, and often it's the ones you don't expect. A piece of legislation, right? Last year, in the state legislature, there were already 15,000 pieces of legislation introduced.
Incredible.
So often these are ones that will destroy you or destroy someone's business, and folks just don't know what it is. So finding people, finding their way to innovate. I'm rambling a little here. In a couple of weeks, so we do work for M&T Bank. M&T Bank is opening a new branch in the Bronx. So we have been taking them around the Bronx and building those relationships with the Speaker of the State Assembly happens to be from there, but so does a member of Congress who's on financial services. So kind of putting all those things together and integrating it is really fun.
What another good example of where you can lean in and add value to a great mainstay company like M&T Bank and help them really think about entering the Bronx and doing it so in a very thoughtful way, and having a resource like you, Jack, to make those strategic introductions. It's a really good example too of where I wouldn't think of that as traditional lobbying, but where your relationships, your contacts, your sort of knowledge of the players could be very, very helpful.
It is. And how do you map that in a way that you're creating jobs in a community that needs them desperately, but you're building a relationship so when there's a bill that's really bad for your business and you're having that conversation, you have that trust. Right, you have that relationship with those decision makers, and they're going to treat your concerns a little differently.
How do you stay? And I've always been impressed since the time I've gotten to know you, Jack, at how well read you are, at how versed you are at bills. You mentioned thousands of bills that come out. It would spin my head to think about knowing what each one of those said or what impact one of those may have on a client. But how do you stay so well informed? Are you constantly reading or listening to podcasts, or what is your go-to mechanisms to stay as sort of current or relevant with current issues?
Yeah, it's sort of an all of the above approach. I mean, I read voraciously. I am addicted to the news cycle and not just Twitter, and social media. But I read a number of newspapers every morning, and you learn in this world that you have to be doing that, right? But then you also need to be talking to folks who you don't know, and asking them questions and finding ways to put it together. I mean, look, we really pride ourselves in knowledge. Our tagline is intelligence guided by experience, right? Putting those things together, which is why, we do this Monday morning memo. If I can put in a plug, right? It's a review of kind of what's happening in Albany and Washington locally in government. We've won a couple awards. I'll tell you, there's a ton of leaders in Albany and in New York City who read it.
That's awesome.
And we're trying to throw open that door, right? A lot of lobbyists will say, well, I did this thing behind closed doors. Just trust me. Who does that in this day and age, right? We've got to show you that value, that return. You've got to know what we're doing, and we've got to be smarter than they are.
Tell me a little bit about your focus on Buffalo and Western New York. What has you excited about some of the developments you see going on in our city these days?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I do think the new mayor is exciting. I think he's going to have some challenges, but one of the things, and I often try to look through these things or look at these things through a historical lens. Buffalo literally hasn't had what I call a change election since 1977. Right, you had Jimmy Griffin kind of hand this over to Tony Masiello, who kind of handed it over to Byron Brown, who handed it over to Chris Scanlon. So for the first time, you have someone who's coming in and shaking things up, and there are enormous challenges that go with that, but there are also opportunities. And my conversations with this mayor, who we know very well from his time in Albany, is he's gonna shoot big, right? He's gonna try to do some big things, and it is essential we do the potholes. It's essential we get the streets plowed, but we need some big thinking, right? How are we going to save downtown? How are we going to revitalize that? We need some of that sort of big picture stuff. The other thing for me is really exciting is we are very involved in the cultural community here, doing work for the Buffalo Zoo, the AKG, Niagara Aquarium. Those things are real drivers of the economy in a way that maybe I didn't know when I was younger. I liked them, enjoyed them. I take my kids to them, but I don't think I fully grasped how essential they are to the economy, how much they add. And I think all of those places have really strong leadership that's looking to the future as well. So I'm excited about what's going to come out of those projects.
And those are just such critical pieces to what is the essence of Western New York. When you talk about the AKG and the Buffalo Zoo, those are institutions, Shays Buffalo, that we as a community need to advocate for and need to see thriving. And you bring up downtown, and it's something that my law firm is committed to staying downtown, and we love being in the Liberty Building. But it is still, we're not seeing yet the traction, the momentum on a given weekend in Buffalo, downtown Buffalo. We're still not seeing tons of people sort of utilizing the shops and restaurants and other cultural venues. So are you actively involved, with others or as a firm, Jack, in thinking about the revitalization of downtown, or what it might take in, 3 to 5 years from now to see more energy and momentum happening downtown?
Yeah, we're working on a project with a developer downtown. We have, through that, been able to build a partnership with folks who are doing the same thing in Rochester, Syracuse, and Albany. We now have some legislation sponsored by Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes that would really provide some help to do office to residential conversions in these downtowns. The state has provided some real resources to do some of that in New York City, and I know you're there regularly. There are some neighborhoods where you can start feeling those changes 100%. Because there's people living there. And I think that's a real key to what's going to happen downtown. So I'm really optimistic about that. We're pushing in the budget this year to make that happen, but I'm really optimistic that's going to happen. And that would help not just the one project they're working on. They think if we could get this done the right way, it could be 5 to 10 projects just for them over the next few years.
Be amazing. I think all of us collectively can do our part to try to make sure that we see this continued investment in and revitalization of Buffalo. I was going to, before I let you go, a couple last items, but one is, think ahead, Jack, and you've had great success and overcome certainly some incredible adversity and challenges in your life, and you should be very proud of that. But give me a sense, a little bit of what you think the future might hold for you. Think 5 years out, 10 years out, continuing doing what you're doing, or doing something different, or you're happy now and can see that continuing for years to come?
Yeah, what a good question, right? I mean, I'll tell you what I see is I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old.
That's what you see right in front of you.
I'm very, very focused on kind of getting them through to the next phase. And in the meantime, look, I love what I do. Like I said, we get to work for these amazing people who are literally saving lives, right? I can't do that. I'm not going to be on the front line of the opioid crisis. Our clients are, right? They're saving lives, right? They're doing that. And here I have, this opportunity that I get to help them do that. And it's just a real blessing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'll let you go, but before I do, I always challenge my guests to give our listeners a little known fact about Jack O'Donnell, or is there something in your background that our listeners might find to be funny or interesting?
Yeah, I'll give you two quick things. I don't know how interesting they are, but, I did publish a book a few years ago about a guy named William Sulzer, the only governor of New York to be impeached. Again, having worked for Allen Hevesy and Eliot Spitzer, that when they got in trouble, the stories were they'll be the first one impeached since William Sulzer. And there wasn't a lot about him, so I went and found out some and published that. It's Bitten by the Tiger. It's on Amazon.
That's
if
awesome.
anybody's interested. The other thing that I would love to see more of in the future, I used to sail competitively, and
that's right.
I used to do that. A lot of fun. In 1996, we qualified for the Olympic trials. Now, we didn't go, and we would have gotten crushed, and, I single-handedly reelected Bill Clinton instead, or delivered New York State for him. But, that was a high point.
That's great. Well, Jack, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciated having you on as a guest today. So best of luck to you going forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm so glad you're doing this. For somebody with your experience, what you've done and what you've done at the firm, to open this up to people is really great.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks so much. How was that, Eric? Thanks, Jack. That was great.
Sure.